Well, coming to the topic of disaster management in India since independence, I was just wondering about if to pick up the line which Alka had given that IGNOU was probably one of the first institutions in the country to start in disaster management. When I was attempting to look at the facts today, I found that probably India was again one of the first in the world to start on disaster management. Disaster management, as we find it now, probably as it has been theorized and conceptualized by the West, much later, when the Greek language in 16th century, the word disaster was coined, whereas Arthashastra, done up by Kautilya, way back in the 3rd century BC, had spoken about disaster management. And he talks about it by saying, I quote it, a calamity constituent of a divine or human origin springs from ill luck or wrong policy. This is what Kautilya had done. The Arthashastra, which was written in the 3rd century BC, remained off the track till 12th century AD, when it did again come up on the scenario, and then in the 20th century when Ramses III made it known to the people in English language. He talks of disasters in this Arthashastra by natural disasters as well as man-made disasters, which we refer to even as on date. And in the natural disaster, he had spoken about it when he says it that it is Vyasana, Vyasana, which is from a Sanskrit word. See, we are talking of disaster which has, as it is in the common sense parlance as of now, which we say that it is a Latin word or the Greek word having the two words death and aster, which means the bad stars, which did have the origin in the 16th century. But look at it, when we find that India has started it way back in the 3rd century BC, so probably we are the initiators as a country as a whole, and in the field of education, IGNOU, yes, is the initiator of disaster management education in the country. You had referred to Alka just now about the National Center for Disaster Management. There also indirectly there was a role which was played by IGNOU. I will touch it upon a bit later during the course of this discussion of ours. So, well, let us start with it. What is India? India is known for the disasters, and India is known for many things. India is known for disasters as well as India is known for disaster management when we try to correlate it with Kautilya's Arthashastra. With a coastline of 7,516 kilometers, we are vulnerable to number of extents. You see, we find in the country, which is so peculiar of its geographical features as well as the topographical influences, that we can have flood and drought in the same city at the same point of time. It cannot be held true of any other country than India. So, well, number of the factors are there which do have a role to play so far as this particular aspect is concerned. We find that disasters occurs with amazing frequency in India, and it has the world's oldest disaster famine relief course. Again, here we find when disaster management got prominence, if we look at India, where we feel that there had been so many disasters which have taken place over the period of time, not going very far off, because otherwise when we look at it, we find probably that disasters are as old as the humanity is. Because in Arthashastra also, when he talks of Vyasani, he talks about it, and the literal meaning of it comes out to be Apta and Vipda, right? Which we find it over here now as disaster and hazard, because hazards have been really innumerable over the period of time at various places. But then it does take place about the disaster depending upon the frequency of the the density of the population over there, the infrastructure over there, the vulnerability of that infrastructure, which converts the hazard into the disaster. So from that end also, India definitely is placed at a very high plateau, because we have the people, we have the poverty, we have illiteracy. Number of the factors combined together, we find that India is the one where the disasters do occur in a very sizable manner. Now, when we look at this particular component, we move further to talk of it, that when you see, looking at it, one finds that there was the Calcutta cyclone, which was there in 1737. and the casualties were 3 to 5 lakhs approximately, which is on record. Bengal famine 1770, 10 million people died over there. Koringa cyclone in Andhra Pradesh 1839, 3.2 lakh people died. The Great Famine 1876-78, Madras, Mysore and Hyderabad and Bombay, 3 crore people were affected and they lost their lives. Kangra earthquake 1905, again 20,000 people died over there. Quetta earthquake 1935. Later on, when we look at it, 1955 floods in India in the post-independence country, India. Odisha super cyclone, Latur earthquake 1993, Odisha super cyclone 1999, Bhuj earthquake 2001, 2004 tsunami, 2005 Kashmir earthquake, Uttarakhand floods 2013, and so on. And now recently we have seen pandemic also, if it is being included in the list of the disasters per se. Now, when that is the scenario, then when did we start about it? Did we start only after independence? No, let us try to look at it. That we say that, well, the Great Famine of 1878, 76, 78, which is also known as the South India Famine, spread from southern India to central and northern parts of India. It covered an area of 6,70,000 square kilometers and affected 58.5 million people. It led to the constitution of the Famine Commission of 1880 and eventual adoption of Famine Relief Code. India probably has the world's oldest disaster relief code, which started in the year 1880. Again, we find it that the Epidemic Disease Act came into being in 1897. Now, these are the two things which will become our base for discussion so far as today's topic is concerned. We are talking about disaster management in India since independence. Well, fine. When we had the relief code which got into being in 1880, and then again we have the Epidemic Disease Act which came into being 1897. It gave impetus to the units of administration for providing relief to the people at the time of the disaster or whenever the disaster strikes, how to give them some kind of aid which is required for their livelihood and for their existence. In the similar manner, it was the Epidemic Disease Act which was taken into stock for the purpose of initiating the steps by the units of administration and the line of the command for working it over there. When Constitution was drafted, and the 7th schedule of the Constitution speaks of that, well, the subjects were divided among the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. Incidentally, the disaster management as a subject, it did not find mention in the union list because it was considered to be that it is something which is dealing with the relief. So obviously, it was left over for the states to take stock of. When later on in the 2005, the Disaster Management Act came into being, it was probably thought of that let it be included in the concurrent list. And again, then there was some kind of a thing which went on, but it did not take place as it is. So well, let us try to have a look at it. Post-independence, when the relief codes were in existence, everything was decided on the basis of the relief code whenever the disasters used to strike. And it is being said about the areas which are more vulnerable to the disasters, where they say, people say that, well, there are not two crops. It is not Rabi and Kharif, but there are 3 crops, that is Rabi, Kharif and Relief. So this was the kind of the notion which was in existence in India after the independence. There came later upon the change in the scenario that, well, we must move and from relief to preparedness or to the preparation. That's a separate issue altogether. We will touch upon it a little later. But when we find it that, well, in the 7th schedule, it was not given to the central list because obviously it was not considered to be the central subject because relief was being looked after by the relief commissioner and it was left to the responsibility of the state government as it is. Going thereupon, when we find that the relief code which provided details of the relief to be given to the government, to the affected people, it was considered to be a very crucial thing so far as the management of the disasters was concerned. And, when we find it could be looked upon as a positive aspect as well as one can look it upon the other way around also, When I had started my studies and my teaching in the field of public administration, not many people, not among us, many among us, they were aware of the disaster per se or the disaster management. But over the period of time, we have learned it across so far as the disaster management is concerned. Government of India in 1999, they constituted a high-powered committee. Now, this high-powered committee, under the chairmanship of one Mr. J.C. Pant, made the first attempt in India towards drawing up a systematic, comprehensive, and holistic approach towards disasters. Why did it happen, and where was the need for that? The need for that was drawn from the international level per se. In the sense, because the last decade of the previous century, it was declared as the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction as per the Yokohama strategy of the 1990s. Alka is aware of it, and so are number of other friends, those who have dealt or worked in this particular field. So we find it over there that the first attempt we find was made with the constitution of this high-powered committee under the chairmanship of J.C. Pant. Odisha super cyclone, which did strike in 1990, it paved the way for more attention of the union and the state governments on concerted efforts towards disaster management. And today, over here at the national level, when we find that there is National Disaster Management Authority, it is also as per the linkage which was established by the Odisha State Disaster Management Authority, which was constituted way back in the year 2000. Later on, when we look at upon, in the year 2001, the Gujarat earthquake was huge and had very serious impacts on the government and policymakers. In addition to the victims, their families and general citizenry, the government of Gujarat was for the first time in India enacted the Gujarat Disaster Management Act 2003. Kindly try to look at the scenario that where from it has emerged. Odisha State Disaster Management Authority getting into being after the Odisha super cyclone, subsequent to the Bhuj earthquake or the Gujarat earthquake of 2001. In the year 2003, the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority came into being. The national level disaster management authority, which is known as NDMA, got into being on 23rd of December 2005. When on 27th November it was passed by, the bill was passed by Rajya Sabha, and 23rd of December it was, 12th of December it was done by Lok Sabha. Then followed by that on 23rd December 2005, Disaster Management Act came into being. Subsequent to that, the National Disaster Management Authority was created. Go back a bit, HPC's recommendations in October 2001 included a draft of the Disaster Management Act, a national response plan, moved from disaster response to disaster preparedness, and establishment of National Disaster Management Authority. Following one of the HPC recommendations, the disaster management function was transferred from the Ministry of Agriculture to Ministry of Home Affairs. Alka, a short while, was referring to some of the projects which we had taken at the behest of the Union Agriculture Ministry, because Agriculture Ministry was the nodal ministry so far as disaster management at that point of time was concerned. It was Agriculture Ministry which took up the initiative, and I remember when there was a national level interaction which did take place in Chennai in 1995, where it was decided, and I was incidentally a part of that, where it was decided that the National Center for Disaster Management should be created, and it got into being in IIPA, right? It was initially in IIPA, and later on, of course, there was a separate institute which got into existence, that is the National Institute of Disaster Management. So that is one thing which is related to that. In the academic year 2003-2004, India took a pioneering step of starting disaster management education as part of social sciences in class 8. In the subsequent academic year, that is 2004-05, disaster management was added to class 9. In the following academic year, disaster management was progressively added to class 11th and 12th. This was done by the CBSE. Now, please be mindful of the year. Started in 2003 and ended up in 2006, from 8th to 9th, 10th to 11th, 12th, 2003. I again lay emphasis upon in 2003. And I started with it that IGNOU was one of the founding institutions in the country which started disaster management. We started working in the field of disaster management way back in 1995. Way back in 1995, 1998, the first 6-month certificate program in disaster management started through open distance learning system, and it was done up by IGNOU. I have just mentioned over here that HPC recommended for a change in the focus from relief to preparation, preparedness, and so on. At international level, people started talking of involvement of the community, and that came up where? That came up in the decade of 2000 to 2010, but again, not with that much focus. More focus came upon post 2015. Even in the 10-point agenda, which has been given by the Prime Minister of India now, talks about the disaster management education and the community involvement in that. My dear friends, fortunate is IGNOU and all of us, which has given to us something to work, an opportunity to work in the field of disaster management, and IGNOU colleagues and IGNOU authorities have shown a way to the country that yes, here you are. We have started something in 1996, which was taken up by the government of India starting from 2003 to 6 for bringing it from class 8 to class 12. Now they are talking of community. We started working in the community awareness way back in 1998. First project which public administration faculty of IGNOU did take up, it was paid by IGNOU, by none else but by IGNOU, when we worked in 32 villages of Maharashtra, 16 each in Pune and Nasik, along with Yashwantrao Chauhan State Academy of Development Administration. That was on community awareness and disaster preparedness. 550 reports are lying in School of Social Sciences, which are community action plans. Not a joke. Reports available, action plans made up in what? In Odia, in Telugu, in Gujarati, right? These are all available over here even as of now. When we talk about it, really one gets really much excited. Definitely me and my colleagues, that's why we definitely feel excited talking about it. So kindly excuse my passion if it is being shown in the conversation. Go ahead. Government of India has long been thinking of National Disaster Management Authority. Gujarat earthquake gave impetus for having a National Disaster Management Authority. The Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 really gave a jolt for this decision process, which finally on 23rd December 2005 NDMA came into being. NDMA, which is the National Disaster Management Authority, has its hold over whole of the country so far as providing lead to the states and then to the districts for working in the field of disaster management. IGNOU again was the pioneer in the country to take up a project with NDMA. Not a joke. To work in 54 districts of the country in 11 states, preparing the manuals in how many languages, probably I may not be able to recount it or recall it. Alka will definitely come to my rescue. English, Hindi, Odia, Telugu, Marathi, Bangla, Malayalam, right? And 7 languages. 7 languages are probably Assamese, right? 8 languages we came out with the manual. The material is available with us. It is the repository. We were approached by a number of the agencies in the country to share that material with us, which we had very generously been doing it. 16,432 trainings were imparted, the training by the local resource in the local language at their place of work, and where per per person, if one looks at that particular training cost, it was just, I think, 100 rupees or 110 rupees or so. That was the expenditure which was incurred thereupon. It was really a very mammoth project with NDMA-IGNOU has worked. So that is again the very big thing so far as disaster management in India is concerned. Looking back again, 2002 to 2007, 10th five-year plan for the first time had a detailed chapter entitled Disaster Management, the Development Perspective. Because you cannot have the disaster management going on in the full way unless and until it is made a part and parcel of the development. I really feel excited to mention it over here that as per 11th and 12th schedule of the Constitution of India, wherein the items have been listed upon to be taken care of by the rural local bodies and the urban local bodies, respectively in 11th and 12th schedule, there are 29 items which are listed to be taken care of by the Panchayati Raj institutions as per the 11th schedule, and 18 items to be taken care of by the urban local bodies in accordance with the 12th schedule of the Constitution of India. On all 47 items, as the role responsibility of the PRIs and ULBs, IGNOU stands taller by making a detailed role to be played at a pre-disaster phase, during disaster phase, and post-disaster phase. This is what has been done up by the IGNOU faculty in the field of disaster management, and India has definitely done it to be. And I haven't come across anywhere in the globe that at that micro level, the roles and the obligations of the various institutions and the representatives are to be enlisted enlisted and made very clear to them. That is again having been done up. To pursue the matter further, the National Policy on Disaster Management got into being in the year 2009. Satyakam ji, I have been assigned the topic disaster management in India since independence. That is why I am talking about this NDMA and DM Act, NDMA, and then the National Policy on Disaster Management, which is prepared in tune with the purpose of the DM Act 2005 to provide the framework for handling disasters in a holistic manner. It covers all aspects of disaster management, covering institutional, legal, and financial arrangements, disaster prevention, mitigation, preparedness, rehabilitation, reconstruction, recovery, legal regime, etc., etc. 11th five-year plan again from 2007 to 2012 stated development process needs to be sensitive towards disaster prevention, preparedness, and mitigation, because minus that you cannot find that there can be effective disaster management. 1 rupee which you spend on disaster preparedness is equivalent to 20 rupees which are being spent on disaster relief and disaster response. That is the importance of the disaster preparedness. And disaster preparedness cannot take place unless and until the people, those who are involved in the gamut, they take stock of it of their own, and the stakeholders, they join hands for working together for taking it up. Really, we have found it at the grassroots level that people are much forthcoming for making contribution, because they feel it that, well, it is going to be in their own interest if there is some step which is being taken up towards preparedness of the disaster. During the course of our work at the grassroots level, we have found it that a number of places, because of the intervention of these teams which are made up for this community awareness on disaster preparedness, the disasters could be averted. One of those places was the village of Mr. Tolia. R.S. Tolia was the director of this UP Academy of Administration, what is now known as the Uttarakhand Academy. It used to be known in those days as the UP Academy of Administration. So the team went over there and found that the landslide is about to take place. The volunteers are the enumerators and the project officer of that particular area. They informed the academy, and the steps were taken for stopping that. So that is the contribution. 11th five-year plan also aimed at consolidating the process by giving impetus to the projects and programs that develop, nurture develop and nurture the culture of safety and the integration of disaster prevention. The guidance and direction to achieve this paradigm shift was in accordance with the need to flow from National Disaster Management Authority and in the true spirit of the Disaster Management Act. For the first time, National Disaster Management Plan was made by the Government of India in the year 2015 and it was released by the President of India in 2016 to make India disaster resilient. It takes stock of global trends in the area of disaster management and incorporates Sendai Framework of Disaster Reduction 2015-30. Framework targets to substantially reduce global disaster mortality by 2030, substantially reduce the number of affected people globally by 2030, reduce direct disaster economic loss in relation to global domestic product by 2030, and so on. As per this framework, 4 principles have been identified for action to prevent new and reduce existing disaster risks. That is, understanding disaster risks, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risks, investing in disaster reduction for resilience, and enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. 10-point agenda outlined by the Prime Minister of the country during Asia Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction held from 3rd to 5th November 2016 included. These are all very important points, so I'm speaking it out. All development sectors must imbibe the principles of disaster risk management. Now, see, had that been done up earlier, despite the fact that the industry's talk of on-site and off-site contingency plans, then probably the Bhopal gas tragedy and the outcome of that would not have been that worse that it had come before us. Number 2, risk coverage must include all, starting from poor households to SMEs, to multinational corporations to nation states. Women's leadership and greater involvement should be central to disaster risk management. Invest in risk mapping globally to improve global understanding of nature and disaster risks. Leverage technology to enhance the efficiency of disaster risk management efforts. Develop a network of universities to work on disaster-related issues. I would like to read it once again. Develop a network of universities to work on disaster-related issues, which your institution has done up way back in 1995, and the efforts culminated in 1997, 98 when we launched that program. Utilize the opportunities provided by social media and mobile technologies for disaster risk reduction. Build on local capacity and initiative to enhance disaster risk reduction. Make use of every opportunity to learn from disasters, and to achieve that, there must be studies on the lessons after every disaster. Bring about greater cohesion in international response to disasters. You find it that starting from 95-96, there is a steady increase in the efforts which are being made in the area of disaster management by the Government of India. Why Government of India is doing it? Because it is making the trigger, it is triggering it up, the effort, so that it takes place at the state level and then at the district level or at the local level per se. Followed by the National Plan of 2015, there was National Disaster Management Plan 2019, which had 5 main pillars. Number 1, conforming to the national legal mandates, that is the Disaster Management Act 2005 and the NPDM National Policy of Disaster Management 2009. Number 2, participating proactively to realize the global goals as per agreements to which India is signatory, that is Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Prime Minister's 10-point agenda for disaster risk reduction, articulating contemporary national priorities. Social inclusion as a ubiquitous and cross-cutting principle, and fifthly, mainstreaming disaster risk reduction as an integral feature. Again, these days what we are finding, the sudden change in the climate and so on. So climate change is being much talked about, and recently we have seen the COP26 also, which has culminated. India has promised to cut its emissions to net zero by 2070. missing a key goal of a COP26 summit for countries to commit to reach that target by 2050. Prime Minister has made the pledge, the first time India has set net zero target at Glasgow summit. Net zero or becoming carbon neutral means not adding to the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The five commitments which have been made again by the Prime Minister and which definitely brings forth the role which is being played by the Government of India in disaster management, that India will achieve net zero emissions by 2070. India will bring its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. India will bring its economy carbon intensity down to 45% by 2030, will fulfill 50% of its energy requirement through renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce 1 billion tons of carbon emissions from the total projected emissions of by 2030. When all these steps are being taken or have been taken, it brings forth that country is much account for its initiatives in the field of disaster management. Then the bells ring again in our ears. When all this is being done, and when we are making so many efforts to do disaster management in accordance with the development goals, in accordance with the sustainability efforts or the sustainable development, then why there are the casualties which do take place. The hazard which gets converted into disaster is again by definition whereby it becomes difficult and probably impossible for the locals to cope up with it, so they definitely need the support from outside. Such a vast country with resources of course available, but then we have both the things go side by side. All goods are not there, all bads also are not there. So what one finds over there is that at times things slip out of hand. So there are certain things which are being seen as the aftermath of that disaster, as the rat which Alka was talking about. See, when 2004 tsunami did strike, or earlier to that, when in 1999 super cyclone had taken place in Odisha on 18th of October and then followed by it on 29th of October. Then later on, when we had seen the cyclones of 2012 in Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, and then in 2015, and again in 2019 and 20, we find that substantive number of the people from the potential area to be hit or targeted by the disaster, by the cyclone, which was known as the cyclone I target point, were evacuated from that place, which never used to be the case earlier. So where from it has come? It has come only by virtue of the efforts which are being made by the various stakeholders. Of course, people get along with it, they join this particular kind of the move which is being taken up by the government or by the non-governmental agencies, and all work together towards it. Hopefully, we will keep on marching in this particular scenario and shall be able to cope with up in a better manner. And we find that, as in the past, laudable steps have been taken up by the governments at the national as well as at the state level in the country. In the similar manner, the things will keep on getting added towards positive outcomes to be achieved and contributing towards effective disaster management in India on the whole. So this is what I wanted to submit or share some of my thoughts, which I might not have sounded really good about it, but definitely I attempted to justify my being allotted this 45 minutes of the precious time out of IGNOU's schedule.